Heroes die forgotten every day, and this billionaire was about to drive past one of them without even knowing it. Andrew Emeka's black Bentley crawled through Lagos traffic, raindrops drumming against bulletproof glass while he scrolled through million-dollar deals. Just another wealthy man insulated from the world's pain by leather seats and tinted windows. But then something in his peripheral vision made him look up. An old man knelt in the rain, begging, broken, forgotten. The kind of scene that makes most people look away and feel grateful for their own lives. Andrew couldn't look away. That face triggered something deep in his memory, a flash of terror, of drowning, of strong hands pulling him from death 22 years ago when he was just a foolish boy who thought he could swim. The man who saved his life was now the one drowning. But this story goes deeper than one rescue, one reunion, one act of gratitude. Because that janitor didn't just save Andrew that day. There was another boy in the water, another family's reaction that would destroy everything this hero held dear. The other family chose blame over gratitude, suspicion over celebration, and their choice would cost this man his job, his reputation, and eventually his wife and daughters in a fire that still haunts his dreams. The second boy grew up carrying that family's poison, 25 years of hatred eating away at his soul. When these two men finally meet again, the truth they uncover will change 3 lives forever. And just when you think you understand where this leads, a letter arrives that rewrites everything. Hidden insurance money, twin babies who become the light of an old man's fading life, a foundation that reaches thousands of forgotten children. Moments of grace so profound, they'll make you question everything you believe about coincidence and destiny. This is the story of how one moment of courage ripples across decades, how forgotten heroes sometimes get second chances, and how the universe occasionally reveals its perfect timing in ways that will take your breath away. By the end, you'll understand why every person you pass on the street might be carrying a story that could change your life. You'll see why kindness is never wasted, even when it seems forgotten. And you'll discover that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in money, but in the love we choose to share with those the world has left behind. What follows will restore something you didn't even know you'd lost. Chapter 1. When Lightning Strikes Twice. The rain poured endlessly over Oshodi Underbridge, washing the streets in muddy streams and drumming hard against car rooftops like 1,000 angry fists demanding attention. Each droplet seemed to carry the weight of Lagos's relentless energy, transforming the bustling city into a waterlogged maze of honking vehicles and hurried pedestrians seeking shelter. Andrew Emeka's black Bentley rolled slowly through the congested traffic, its polished body gleaming under the scattered streetlights like a beacon of prosperity in the urban storm. The vehicle moved with the deliberate pace of wealth, unhurried, confident, commanding respect, even in the chaos of Lagos traffic. Inside, the soft hum of the air conditioning created a cocoon of comfort, separating Andrew from the harsh realities just beyond his tinted windows. He sat in the back seat, his Italian leather shoes crossed elegantly, scrolling through emails on his phone with the practiced efficiency of a man who had built an empire from nothing. The blue glow of the screen illuminated his face, highlighting the sharp features that had graced countless business magazines. At 32, Andrew Emeka was Nigeria's youngest tech billionaire, a man whose name commanded boardrooms and whose decisions could shift markets. But tonight, as his fingers moved across the screen reviewing quarterly reports and investment proposals, something made him pause. A movement in his peripheral vision, barely visible through the rain-streaked window, caught his attention like a whisper in a thunderstorm. His eyes lifted from the phone, and what he saw made his world stop. There, on the roadside, was a figure that seemed to embody every tragedy Lagos had ever witnessed. An old man knelt in the rain, his body trembling, not just from the cold but from something deeper, a desperation that penetrated even the luxury of Andrew's Bentley. The man's tattered shirt clung to his thin frame like a second skin, revealing ribs that pressed against fabric worn thin by countless storms. His beard, overgrown and tangled, caught raindrops that mixed with what Andrew suddenly realized were tears. The old man's hands were stretched out toward the passing traffic, not in anger or demand, but in a plea so humble it made Andrew's chest tighten. His lips moved in silent words, perhaps prayers, perhaps simple requests for food, for mercy, for someone to see him as human. Andrew's grip on his phone loosened. The device slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the leather seat as his entire body went rigid. His heart began to pound with a rhythm that had nothing to do with his usual business stress and everything to do with recognition. A recognition so profound it reached back through decades to grab him by the throat. That face, even weathered by years of hardship, even hollowed by hunger and marked by suffering, Andrew knew that face. The memories didn't trickle back. They slammed into him like a freight train carrying the full weight of his childhood. He was 10 years old again, standing at the edge of the school swimming pool in his crisp uniform, watching the older boys dive and swim with the grace of dolphins. The afternoon sun reflected off the water like scattered diamonds, and young Andrew had felt invincible, immortal, ready to prove that he could be just as skilled as the athletes he idolized on television. The decision had been impulsive, driven by the fearless confidence that only a 10-year-old could possess. He had waited until the pool area was nearly empty, until the coaches had gone home and most students had departed for the day. Then, still wearing his school uniform, he had jumped into the deep end with a smile that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Panic had swallowed him whole. The water, which had looked so inviting from above, became a liquid prison that filled his lungs and dragged him down with merciless efficiency. His tiny arms flailed helplessly as darkness wrapped around him like a burial shroud. In those terrifying moments, as consciousness slipped away, he had accepted that his life would end at 10 years old, that his dreams of greatness would die with him in 6 feet of chlorinated water. Then strong arms had plunged into the depths, pulling him from death's embrace. A man's voice had shouted through the chaos, "Stay with me, boy! Stay with me!" Rough hands had pumped his chest, forcing water from his lungs and air back into his body. When Andrew had finally opened his eyes, coughing and gasping, he had seen the face of his savior. It was the janitor, Mr. Williams, the quiet man who mopped floors and emptied trash cans, who most students barely noticed as he went about his work with dignified silence. But that day, Mr. Williams had been Andrew's guardian angel, the difference between life and death. Now, 22 years later, Andrew whispered the name that had haunted his grateful thoughts for decades. Mr. Williams. His throat felt like sandpaper as the impossible reality crashed over him. The man who had saved his life, who had given him the chance to become everything he was today, was kneeling in the rain like a discarded piece of humanity, begging for scraps from a world that had forgotten his value. The Bentley continued its slow crawl through traffic, but Andrew leaned forward, pressing his face against the window, his breath fogging the glass as his eyes locked onto the broken figure on the roadside. Every instinct screamed that this couldn't be real, that fate couldn't be so cruel as to reduce a hero to this. The driver, noticing the sudden tension in the car, glanced back nervously through the rearview mirror. In all his years of service, he had never seen his composed billionaire boss look so shaken, so vulnerable. "Sir," he said carefully, "is everything all right?" Andrew didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, calculating distances and possibilities, but his heart was screaming a single command. "Stop the car. Stop the car now." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, and Mr. Williams continued his heartbreaking vigil, unaware that salvation sat just yards away in the form of the boy whose life he had once saved. Finally, Andrew found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Stop the car." The driver hesitated, glancing at the chaotic traffic around them in the torrential rain. "Sir, we're in the middle of—" "I said stop the car!" Andrew's voice exploded with an authority that made the driver's hands jerk on the steering wheel. The Bentley lurched to a halt, earning angry honks from the vehicles behind them. Andrew's hand was already on the door handle, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. 22 years of success, of building an empire, of being photographed with presidents and prime ministers. None of it mattered now. What mattered was the man in the rain, the man who had given him the gift of life when he was too young to understand its value. The driver tried one more protest. "Sir, you can't step out here. The rain, the traffic." But Andrew was already pushing the door open, his Italian leather shoes splashing into the muddy water that had pooled on the asphalt. The cold rain hit him like a physical blow, instantly soaking through his $1,000 suit, but he barely noticed. His entire focus was on the figure ahead, on closing the distance between his present and his past. Each step toward Mr. Williams felt like walking through quicksand. The rain made everything harder, the ground slippery, his vision blurred, his expensive clothes heavy with water. But nothing could have stopped him. Not the chaos of Lagos traffic, not the stares of confused onlookers, not the voice in his head that whispered about appearances and reputations. As he drew closer, Andrew could see the full extent of Mr. Williams' deterioration. The man who had once stood tall and strong, who had possessed the power to pull a drowning child from death, now looked fragile enough to be blown away by the wind. His clothes were little more than rags, his body so thin that Andrew wondered when he had last eaten a proper meal. Mr. Williams hadn't noticed him yet. The old man's eyes were fixed on the passing traffic, his lips moving in what Andrew realized were quiet pleas for help, for kindness, for someone to acknowledge his existence. The sight broke something fundamental in Andrew's chest, a pain so sharp it felt like his heart was being carved out with a rusty knife. Andrew fumbled with his umbrella, his hands shaking not from the cold, but from emotion so powerful it threatened to bring him to his knees. When he finally managed to open it, he held it over Mr. Williams, shielding the frail man from the relentless rain. Mr. Williams. The name came out as barely more than a whisper, but it carried 22 years of gratitude, regret, and desperate hope. Chapter 2. Recognition in the Rain. The old man lifted his face slowly, as if the simple act of looking up required all his remaining strength. His eyes were bloodshot and tired, clouded with the kind of exhaustion that came not from a single sleepless night, but from years of carrying burdens too heavy for one man to bear. When those weary eyes met Andrew's, something flickered in their depths, a spark of memory struggling to ignite despite the dampening effects of time and suffering. For a moment that lasted an eternity, the two men simply stared at each other. The chaos of Lagos traffic continued around them, horns honking, engines revving, people shouting. But in that small space beneath Andrew's umbrella, the world had narrowed to just two souls recognizing each other across the vast chasm of years. Mr. Williams's lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible above the rain. Andrew? The sound of his name, spoken in that familiar voice now roughened by hardship, nearly shattered Andrew's composure completely. Tears welled in his eyes, mixing with the rainwater that had already soaked his face. "Yes," he managed to say, his own voice cracking with emotion. "It's me. It's Andrew." Recognition bloomed fully in Mr. Williams's eyes now, followed immediately by a wave of emotions so complex that Andrew could read them all. Joy, disbelief, shame, hope, and something that might have been relief. The old man's shoulders began to shake, and Andrew realized he was crying. Not the silent tears of desperation he had been shedding moments before, but the deep, body-racking sobs of a man whose burden had suddenly become too much to bear alone. "Do you remember?" Andrew asked, dropping to his knees in the muddy water without a thought for his expensive suit. The Italian wool was already ruined, but he couldn't have cared less. "Do you remember the school pool? You saved me. If not for you, I wouldn't be here today." Mr. Williams let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping under the weight of years of suffering that had followed that one act of heroism. "I remember," he whispered. "I would do it again 1,000 times." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet conviction, hit Andrew like a physical blow. Here was a man who had lost everything: his home, his family, his dignity, his place in the world. And yet he could still say without hesitation that he would risk it all again to save a child's life. The nobility of it, the pure goodness that had survived, despite everything the world had thrown at him, left Andrew speechless. For several heartbeats, Andrew simply knelt there in the rain, staring at the man who had given him life. The old janitor looked so different from the strong, confident figure Andrew remembered from his childhood. Time and tragedy had carved deep lines in his face, had stolen the flesh from his bones and the light from his eyes. But beneath it all, Andrew could still see the essence of the man who had pulled him from the water 22 years ago. The kindness, the strength of character, the willingness to act when action was needed. Finally, Andrew found his voice again. "What happened to you, Mr. Williams? How did it come to this?" The question seemed to age Mr. Williams even further if such a thing were possible. His lips trembled as he struggled to find words for a story that was clearly too painful to tell easily. When he finally spoke, his voice was so fragile that Andrew had to strain to hear it over the storm. Life happened, Andrew. Life happened in the most terrible way. And then, piece by devastating piece, the story came out. Mr. Williams spoke haltingly, pausing frequently to gather strength or to push through particularly painful memories. His voice was barely above a whisper, but every word landed on Andrew's heart like a hammer blow. There was a fire, Mr. Williams began, his eyes unfocused as he looked into a past that still haunted him. It took my home in the middle of the night. My wife, my 2 daughters, they were trapped in their bedroom. I tried to reach them, tried to break down the door, but the flames... His voice broke completely, and for a moment he couldn't continue. Andrew felt his own throat close with emotion. The idea of this gentleman losing his entire family in such a horrific way was almost unbearable. He reached out instinctively, covering Mr. Williams's trembling hands with his own, offering what comfort he could through touch since words seemed impossibly inadequate. They called me cursed after that, Mr. Williams continued when he found his voice again. Said I was a bad man, that the fire was punishment for my sins. Parents at the school started complaining, spreading rumors, saying I was dangerous to be around children. They pointed to the pool incident, twisted it into something dark, said I had lured you and other children into danger. The injustice of it made Andrew's blood boil. He wanted to rage against the small-minded people who had taken this man's act of heroism and perverted it into something sinister. But he forced himself to stay quiet, to let Mr. Williams finish his story. The school dismissed me, the old man went on. Said they had no choice with all the complaints. I begged for work, went from place to place, but the rumors followed me. No one wanted to hire a man who was supposedly cursed, who had lost his family to fire. One by one, I lost everything, my savings, my dignity, my hope, until all I had left was the streets. He looked up at Andrew then, his eyes filled with a desperate need to be believed, to be understood. Andrew, I swear to you, I am not a bad man. I wouldn't have saved you if I were a bad man. I wouldn't have risked my own life to pull you from that water if there was evil in my heart. The plea was so heartfelt, so utterly sincere, that Andrew felt something break inside his chest. This man, this hero who had saved his life, had spent years carrying the burden of other people's fear and ignorance. He had been punished for his goodness, ostracized for his courage, reduced to begging in the rain because a society that should have honored him had instead chosen to destroy him. Andrew couldn't breathe. The weight of injustice, of wasted years, of a good man's suffering pressed down on him like a physical force. His mind screamed that this wasn't how the story was supposed to go. Heroes weren't supposed to end up broken and forgotten. Good deeds weren't supposed to be rewarded with decades of pain. But as he looked at Mr. Williams, really looked at him, saw past the ravages of time and hardship to the essential goodness that still shone in his eyes, Andrew realized something profound. This man's story wasn't over, not yet. The rain continued to fall around them, but beneath Andrew's umbrella, a new chapter was beginning to write itself. You saved me once, Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion as he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Now it's my turn. Chapter 3. Promises in the Storm. Andrew's words hung in the air between them like a sacred vow, heavy with the weight of 22 years of gratitude, finally finding its voice. Mr. Williams looked up at him with eyes that had forgotten how to hope, confusion and disbelief warring across his weathered features. Andrew, you don't understand, the old man whispered, his voice barely audible above the relentless drumming of rain on concrete. I'm nobody now, just a broken old man that the world threw away. You have your life, your success. You don't owe me anything. The protest ignited something fierce in Andrew's chest. Without a second thought, he pulled Mr. Williams into his arms, lifting the frail man as easily as he might lift a child. The old janitor gasped in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief that the boy he had once saved was now carrying him like a father carries a son. You are not nobody, Andrew said, his voice shaking with emotion as rainwater and mud stained his expensive suit. "You are the reason I am alive today. You are the reason I became a man, a CEO, everything I am. Without you, I would have died as a foolish boy who thought he could swim." The physical act of lifting Mr. Williams seemed to transfer some of Andrew's strength to the older man. Or perhaps it simply reminded him that human kindness still existed in a world that had shown him so little of it. Tears streamed down his face as he allowed himself to be carried, his arms wrapping weakly around Andrew's neck. "Open the car door!" Andrew shouted to his driver, who had been watching the entire scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and concern. The man had served wealthy clients for years, but he had never seen anything like this. His billionaire boss kneeling in the rain, holding what appeared to be a homeless man with the tenderness of someone caring for family. The driver hesitated for a moment, clearly struggling with the situation. The interior of the Bentley was pristine leather and polished wood, a space reserved for Nigeria's elite. But something in Andrew's tone, the raw authority mixed with desperate compassion, left no room for argument. He jumped out into the rain and opened the rear door. As Andrew gently placed Mr. Williams into the warm, dry interior of the car, he was struck by the contrast. The old man's tattered clothes and unwashed hair seemed to belong to a different world than the luxury surrounding them. But Andrew didn't see the disparity. He saw only a hero who had been forgotten by everyone except the boy whose life he had saved. "You saved me once," Andrew repeated, settling into the seat beside Mr. Williams and wrapping his suit jacket around the shivering man's shoulders. "Now it's my turn." The door slammed shut, sealing them into a cocoon of warmth and quiet. The chaos of Lagos traffic became muted, the rain reduced to a gentle pattering on the roof. In this protected space, the full magnitude of what was happening seemed to settle over both men. Mr. Williams leaned weakly against the plush leather seat, his eyes closing as warmth began to seep back into his chilled bones. The simple luxury of being dry, of being warm, of being treated with kindness seemed to overwhelm him. Tears continued to slide down his cheeks, but they were different now. Not the desperate tears of a man begging for survival, but the overwhelmed tears of someone experiencing grace. "I don't understand," he whispered without opening his eyes. "Why are you doing this? After all these years?" Andrew studied the man's profile, seeing past the ravages of hardship to the face he remembered from his childhood. "Because I never forgot," he said simply. "Not for a single day. Every success I've had, every milestone I've reached, I've thought about the man who made it possible. I've wondered where you were, how you were doing, whether you knew that the boy you saved had made something of his life." The confession seemed to break something loose in Mr. Williams' chest. His breathing became labored, not from physical distress, but from the emotional weight of learning that his act of courage had not been forgotten, that it had been carried in someone's heart for over 2 decades. "I thought," he began, then stopped, struggling with words. "After everything that happened, after the way people looked at me, the things they said, I thought maybe I had been wrong to save you. Maybe the world was telling me that I should have let—" "No," Andrew interrupted fiercely, grabbing the old man's hands in his own. "Don't you ever think that. Not for a second. You saved my life, and I have spent every day since then trying to be worthy of that gift." The Bentley had begun moving again, gliding through the rain-soaked streets of Lagos toward Lagos Medical Center. Andrew had made the decision without conscious thought. Mr. Williams needed medical attention, proper food, a place to rest and recover. But more than that, he needed to know that his story was not ending in the gutter, that the man who had shown such courage deserved to be treated with the dignity that had been stolen from him. As they rode through the storm, Andrew found himself studying every detail of Mr. Williams's face, cataloging the changes that 22 years had wrought. The strong jawline was still there, though hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and malnutrition. The eyes that had been so alert and kind in Andrew's memory were dulled now by suffering, but the essential goodness still shone through. This was still the man who had risked his own life to save a drowning child, who had acted without thought of reward or recognition. "Tell me about your family," Andrew said gently, sensing that Mr. Williams needed to talk, needed to share the burden he had been carrying alone for so long. The request seemed to open a floodgate. Mr. Williams began to speak about his wife, Maria, who had taught Sunday school and made the best jollof rice in their neighborhood. He talked about his daughters, Grace and Faith, who had been 8 and 10 when they died, full of dreams and laughter, and the kind of innocence that makes life worth living. His voice grew stronger as he shared these memories, as if speaking about them aloud was bringing them back to life in some small way. Grace wanted to be a doctor, he said, a smile ghosting across his lips despite his tears. She used to practice on her dolls, wrapping bandages around their arms and legs, very serious about making them better. Faith loved to sing. Every morning I would wake up to her voice carrying through the house like music. Andrew listened in silence, his heart breaking for this man who had lost everything that mattered to him. The injustice of it was staggering, that someone who had given so much could have had so much taken away. They would have been proud of what you've become, Mr. Williams said suddenly, looking at Andrew with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Maria always said that when you save a life, you become responsible for all the good that person does. She would have been proud to know that the boy I pulled from the water grew up to be a man who helps others. The observation hit Andrew like a physical blow. In all his years of success, of building his business empire and accumulating wealth, he had never thought about his accomplishments in those terms. But now, seeing them through Mr. Williams's eyes, he understood something profound about responsibility and legacy. Then let me help you, Andrew said. Let me be the good that came from your courage. By the time they reached the hospital, both men had been transformed. Mr. Williams was no longer just a broken old man begging in the rain. He was a hero reclaiming his story. And Andrew was no longer just a successful businessman. He was a son repaying a debt that could never truly be settled. Chapter 4. Emergency and Recognition. The emergency room at Lagos Medical Center erupted into controlled chaos when Andrew burst through the sliding doors, carrying Mr. Williams in his arms like a father rushing to save his child. The scene was so unexpected, so contrary to everything the medical staff expected from their typical Friday night, that for a moment everyone simply stopped and stared. A billionaire CEO, his expensive suit soaked through and stained with mud, cradling what appeared to be a homeless man with the tenderness usually reserved for family members. It was the kind of image that would have made headlines if any photographers had been present, the kind of human interest story that could have redefined Andrew's public image. But Andrew wasn't thinking about publicity or reputation. His entire focus was on the man in his arms who had given him the gift of life. "This man is my father," Andrew shouted, his voice carrying across the busy emergency room with an authority that cut through the usual hospital noise. "Admit him, treat him, whatever he needs, he gets it." The declaration sent a ripple of shock through the medical staff. Nurses who had been going about their routine suddenly straightened. Doctors who had been reviewing charts looked up in surprise. The intensity in Andrew's voice, the desperation mixed with determination, left no doubt that he was serious about every word. Dr. Sarah Okafor, the attending physician on duty, was the first to recover from the surprise. She had treated enough emergency cases to recognize genuine medical need when she saw it, regardless of the unusual circumstances surrounding the patient's arrival. With quick professional movements, she gestured for a gurney and began her initial assessment. "What's his condition?" she asked Andrew, her hands already checking Mr. Williams's pulse and breathing while nurses gathered around with medical equipment. "Malnutrition, exposure, exhaustion," Andrew replied, his medical knowledge limited but his concern absolute. "He's been living on the streets. I don't know for how long, but he's weak, very weak." As the medical team took over, Andrew found himself relegated to the sidelines, watching helplessly as Mr. Williams was wheeled away for tests and treatment. The sudden absence of action left him feeling strangely empty, as if all the adrenaline that had carried him through the last hour was draining away at once. He stood in the middle of the emergency room, still dripping rainwater onto the polished floor, his expensive clothes ruined beyond repair. Other patients and their families stared at him with curious eyes, clearly trying to piece together the story behind what they had witnessed. But Andrew barely noticed their attention. His entire consciousness was focused on the doors that had swallowed Mr. Williams, on the uncertainty of what would happen next. A young nurse approached him cautiously, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of gentle expression reserved for family members in crisis. "Sir, we'll need some information for our records. Are you really his son?" The question should have been simple to answer, but Andrew found himself pausing. In the legal sense, no. He had no biological relationship to Mr. Williams whatsoever. But in every way that mattered, in every way that counted in the universe of debt and gratitude and love, the answer was different. He saved my life when I was a child, Andrew said quietly. In every way that matters, yes, he is my father. The nurse seemed to understand something in his tone that went beyond words. She nodded and began filling out the paperwork without asking for further clarification. Sometimes, she had learned in her years of hospital work, family was defined by love rather than genetics. For the next 3 hours, Andrew paced the waiting room with the restless energy of a caged predator. He called Amanda to explain why he would be late, though he struggled to find words for what had happened. How could he explain that he had found the man who saved his life begging in the rain? How could he make her understand the cosmic significance of this reunion? He also called his assistant, instructing her to clear his schedule for the foreseeable future. There would be no board meetings, no investor calls, no strategic planning sessions, until he knew that Mr. Williams was safe and cared for. For the first time in his adult life, business would have to wait. As the night wore on, Andrew's mind wandered back through the years, replaying memories he hadn't accessed in decades. He remembered the aftermath of the drowning incident, how Mr. Williams had stayed with him until his parents arrived, how the janitor had kept checking on him in the days that followed to make sure he was recovering properly. He remembered the quiet dignity with which the man had gone about his work, never seeking recognition or praise for what he had done. And now, learning about the fire, about the loss of Mr. Williams's family, about the way the community had turned against him, it painted a picture of injustice so profound that Andrew felt physically sick. This man had lost everything because of other people's ignorance and fear, had been punished for his goodness by a world that couldn't understand the difference between tragedy and evil. Finally, as dawn was beginning to break over Lagos, Dr. Okafor emerged from the treatment area. Her expression was tired but relieved, the look of someone who had spent the night fighting for a patient's life and had won. He's stable, she told Andrew, who immediately straightened from his slumped position in the waiting room chair. Severely malnourished and dehydrated, showing signs of long-term exposure and stress. But he's stronger than he looks. With proper care, proper nutrition, and rest, he should make a full recovery. The words hit Andrew like a wave of relief, so powerful it nearly knocked him to his knees. Can I see him? He's sleeping now, but yes, you can see him. He's been asking for you. Andrew followed the doctor through the hospital corridors, his heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety. When they reached Mr. Williams' room, he paused at the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed by what he was about to see. The man lying in the hospital bed looked so different from the figure Andrew had found in the rain. Clean, warm, connected to monitors that beeped reassuringly with each heartbeat, Mr. Williams seemed to have regained some essential spark of life. His face, though still gaunt, had lost the gray pallor of desperation. His breathing was steady and peaceful. He kept saying your name while we were treating him, Dr. Okafor said quietly. He seemed afraid that you would disappear, that this was all a dream. Andrew approached the bed slowly, taking in every detail of Mr. Williams's face in the soft hospital lighting. Even unconscious, even after everything he had endured, the man radiated a kind of fundamental goodness that made Andrew's chest tight with emotion. You saved him just in time, the doctor continued. Another few weeks on the streets in his condition, and... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Andrew understood. He had found Mr. Williams in time, but barely. The realization that he might have been too late, that he might have discovered the truth only to lose the man who had saved him, was almost unbearable. As if sensing Andrew's presence, Mr. Williams's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he looked confused, disoriented by the clean white room and the soft bed. But when his gaze found Andrew's face, relief flooded his features. You're real, he whispered, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been in the rain. I thought I had dreamed you. Andrew pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, taking Mr. Williams' hand in his own. I'm real. And you're safe now. You're never going to be alone again. The promise felt sacred as it left his lips, a vow that reached back 22 years to a drowning boy, and forward into a future that neither man could yet imagine. But in that hospital room, as dawn broke over Lagos and two lives found each other again, anything seemed possible. Chapter 5. A New Beginning. 3 days later, Mr. Williams walked out of his hospital room transformed. The clothes Andrew had bought for him, crisp khaki pants, a soft button-down shirt, comfortable sandals, fit him properly for the first time in years. His beard had been trimmed to a dignified length, his hair cut and styled, his fingernails cleaned. The change was so dramatic that the hospital staff did double takes as he made his way slowly down the corridor, leaning lightly on a walking stick that Andrew had insisted upon. But the most significant transformation wasn't visible in his appearance. It was in his posture, in the way he held his head up instead of bowing it in shame, in the light that had returned to his eyes. For the first time in years, Mr. Williams looked like a man who believed he deserved to take up space in the world. Andrew waited in the hospital lobby, his heart racing with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just relief or happiness. It was something deeper, something that felt like completion. For 22 years, a part of him had been missing, a debt unpaid that had weighed on his soul. Now, finally, he could begin to balance the scales. When Mr. Williams appeared at the top of the stairs, moving slowly but steadily, Andrew had to fight back tears. The old man paused when he saw him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the lobby. The successful businessman and the rescued janitor, their lives connected by threads of gratitude and grace that had stretched across decades. "Andrew," Mr. Williams said, his voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "Why are you doing all this for me? I am nobody special." The question broke Andrew's heart all over again. After everything this man had endured, after all the ways the world had failed him, he still couldn't see his own worth. But Andrew could see it clearly enough for both of them. "You are not nobody," Andrew said, his voice firm with conviction. "You are the reason I'm alive today. If not for you, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be a man. I wouldn't be a CEO. I would have died as a foolish boy who thought he could swim. You gave me life, and now I give you mine." He paused, taking a deep breath before speaking the words that would change both their lives forever. "From today, you are my father." The declaration hit Mr. Williams like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and Andrew rushed forward to catch him before he could fall. The old man's face was streaked with tears, his body shaking with the weight of emotions too powerful to contain. "My son," he whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of years of loneliness and abandonment. "I lost my daughters, my wife, everything. But God has given me a son." To the shock of everyone in the hospital lobby, Andrew dropped to his knees before Mr. Williams, taking the older man's hands in his own. The sight of a billionaire kneeling before what most would consider a homeless man sent ripples of whispered conversation through the crowded space. But Andrew didn't care about appearances or social conventions. This was about something far more important than wealth or status. "You don't kneel to me," Andrew said firmly, rising and helping Mr. Williams to his feet. "I kneel to you. You saved me, and I will never let you suffer again." The drive to Andrew's mansion in Ikoyi was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of two people who had found each other after a long separation. Mr. Williams sat in the passenger seat, his eyes wide as he took in the transformed Lagos landscape. The city had grown and changed dramatically since his days as a school janitor. New buildings reaching toward the sky, new roads cutting through areas that had once been undeveloped land. "The world kept moving," he said softly, more to himself than to Andrew. "Even when I stopped, the world kept moving." Andrew glanced at him, understanding the deeper meaning behind the observation. For years, Mr. Williams had existed in a kind of suspended animation, surviving day to day without really living. But now, suddenly, he was being pulled back into a world that had continued evolving without him. "It's never too late to start moving again," Andrew replied gently. "And you won't be moving alone." When they reached the mansion, Mr. Williams stopped at the massive gates, his mouth falling open in amazement. The property was like something from a movie. Acres of manicured gardens, a sprawling house that looked more like a palace, fountains and statuary that spoke of wealth beyond imagination. "This is your home?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "This is our home," Andrew corrected, and he meant it completely. The staff had been briefed on Mr. Williams' arrival, but Andrew had been careful about how he presented the situation. He had simply told them that a very important member of his family would be staying with them, someone who deserved the highest level of respect and care. He hadn't mentioned the man's background or the circumstances of their reunion. Those details were private, sacred even. Mrs. Adebayo, the head housekeeper who had worked for Andrew for 5 years, greeted them at the front door with a warm smile. She was a motherly woman in her 50s who had an innate ability to make everyone feel welcome, and Andrew had specifically chosen her to handle the introductions. "Welcome home, sir," she said to Mr. Williams, and the simple word, home, made the old man's eyes fill with tears once again. Andrew led Mr. Williams through the mansion, showing him the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier, the comfortable sitting rooms where he could relax and watch television. But it was when they reached the guest suite that had been prepared for him that Mr. Williams truly understood the magnitude of what was happening. The room was larger than any apartment he had lived in during his working years. It had its own bathroom with a jetted tub, a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, a sitting area with leather chairs positioned near windows that looked out over the gardens. Fresh flowers had been arranged on the nightstand, and someone had laid out pajamas and a robe on the bed. "This is too much," Mr. Williams whispered, his hand running over the smooth fabric of the comforter. "I don't deserve this." "You deserve everything," Andrew said firmly. "You deserve to sleep in a soft bed, to eat warm meals, to be treated with the dignity that should never have been taken from you." That first night, Andrew barely slept. He found himself walking the halls of his mansion, checking on Mr. Williams, making sure the man was comfortable, that he had everything he needed. It wasn't just concern for his guests' physical well-being. It was the deep, abiding fear that this was all too good to be true, that somehow the universe would snatch away this chance at redemption. But when morning came and Andrew found Mr. Williams sitting on the balcony outside his room, watching the sunrise over Lagos with a cup of coffee in his hands, he knew that this was real. The old man was safe, cared for, home. Chapter 6. Family Dinner. Within a week, Mr. Williams had settled into the rhythm of life at the mansion with remarkable grace. The staff, initially uncertain about how to interact with him, quickly grew fond of the quiet, polite man who always thanked them for the smallest kindnesses and who never demanded anything for himself. Andrew made a point of spending every evening with him, the two men sharing dinner in the formal dining room, or sometimes, when the weather was nice, on the terrace overlooking the gardens. These meals became the highlight of both their days. Andrew learning about Mr. Williams's life before the tragedy, and Mr. Williams hearing about Andrew's journey from the scared boy in the pool to the successful businessman he had become. "Tell me about your business," Mr. Williams said one evening, cutting into the perfectly prepared jollof rice that the cook had made especially for him. "I want to understand what the boy I saved grew up to accomplish." Andrew smiled, pleased by the genuine interest in the old man's voice. "I started with nothing," he began. "Well, not exactly nothing. I had the education my parents provided, and I had the drive that came from knowing how precious life is. After university, I worked for a tech company for a few years, learning everything I could about software development and business management." He paused to take a sip of wine, remembering those early days when success had seemed impossible. "But I always knew I wanted to build something of my own. I wanted to create technology that would help people, that would make lives better. So I borrowed money, found a small office, and started developing mobile applications for Nigerian businesses." "Applications?" Mr. Williams asked, clearly struggling with the terminology. "Programs for phones and computers," Andrew explained patiently. "Software that helps companies manage their finances, communicate with customers, track inventory. Things that used to require rooms full of paperwork can now be done with a few touches on a screen." Mr. Williams nodded thoughtfully, though Andrew could tell the concept was still somewhat foreign to him. The world had changed so dramatically during his years of isolation that technology like smartphones and internet connectivity felt like magic. "And this made you wealthy?" the old man asked. "Eventually, yes, but more importantly, it made me useful. My company now employs over 3,000 people across West Africa. We've helped thousands of small businesses grow and succeed. We've created jobs, generated tax revenue, contributed to the economy. Andrew leaned forward, his eyes bright with passion. Every day I get to wake up knowing that the life you saved is being used to help other people build better lives for themselves. The pride in Mr. Williams's eyes was unmistakable. Maria always said that when you save someone, you become responsible for all the good they do afterward. She would have been so proud to know what you've accomplished. That evening, as they sat together on the terrace under a canopy of stars, Mr. Williams began to share stories about his own family. He talked about Maria's laugh, which could fill a room and make even the grumpiest person smile. He described Grace's determined efforts to bandage injured birds she found in their garden, her absolute conviction that she could heal anything with enough love and gauze. He spoke of Faith's voice, pure and sweet, leading the children's choir at their church. They were everything to me, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion even after all these years. When the fire took them, I thought my life was over. I didn't understand why God would spare me and take them. I spent years angry, questioning, wondering if I was being punished for some sin I didn't even know I had committed. Andrew listened in silence, understanding that this was a sacred sharing, that Mr. Williams was trusting him with the deepest pain of his heart. But now, the old man continued, sitting here with you, seeing what you've become, I think I'm beginning to understand. Maybe I was spared not as punishment, but because my work wasn't finished. Maybe saving you was just the beginning of my purpose, not the end of it. The observation hit Andrew with stunning force. He had always thought of Mr. Williams's heroism as a single moment, dramatic, crucial, but contained within the space of a few minutes at a school swimming pool. But what if it was bigger than that? What if saving Andrew's life had been just the first step in a larger plan, a purpose that was still unfolding? You're right, Andrew said slowly. Your work isn't finished, and neither is mine. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed between them that felt as natural as if they had been family for decades. Mr. Williams would rise early, often before dawn, and spend time in quiet reflection on his balcony. Andrew would join him for breakfast, and they would discuss the day ahead, Andrew's business obligations, Mr. Williams's slowly improving health, plans for the weekend. The old man had begun taking walks around the estate, building his strength and reacquainting himself with the simple pleasure of moving through beautiful spaces without fear or shame. He spent hours in the library, reading voraciously, catching up on years of current events and discoveries. The staff had grown genuinely fond of him, and he often spent time in the kitchen, sharing cooking tips with the chef or helping with simple tasks that made him feel useful. But it was the evenings that meant the most to both men. Dinner had become a sacred time, a daily opportunity to strengthen the bond that had formed between them. Andrew found himself looking forward to these conversations more than any business meeting or social obligation. There was something about Mr. Williams's presence that grounded him, that reminded him of what truly mattered in life. You need a wife, Mr. Williams said one evening, his eyes twinkling with mischief. A successful man like you shouldn't be alone. When will I get to hold your children in these old arms before I leave this world? Andrew laughed, but the comment struck deeper than he wanted to admit. He had everything, wealth, success, respect, a beautiful home, but he had no one to share it with. His romantic relationships had been brief and superficial, lacking the depth and connection he suddenly realized he craved. I haven't found the right person yet, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if that was really true, or if he had simply been too focused on building his empire to invest properly in building a relationship. When you do find her, Mr. Williams said gently, make sure she has a good heart. Beauty fades, money comes and goes, but a good heart. That's what makes a family strong. The advice came from a man who had loved deeply and lost everything, who understood the value of connection in ways that Andrew was only beginning to grasp. That night, as Andrew lay in his bed in the master suite, he found himself thinking not just about business plans and investment strategies, but about the kind of woman who might complete the family that he and Mr. Williams were building together. He had no way of knowing that fate was already arranging for him to meet exactly that person, or that when he did, Mr. Williams would immediately recognize in her the daughter he had lost and the hope for the future he had almost given up on believing in. Chapter 7. Love Finds a Way. 2 months after Mr. Williams had moved into the mansion, Andrew attended a technology conference at the Eco Hotel in Victoria Island. It was the kind of event he usually approached with professional detachment, networking opportunities, potential partnerships, chances to scout emerging talent. But that day, distracted by thoughts of the conversation he'd had with Mr. Williams the night before about finding someone special, Andrew's attention was drawn to a speaker who commanded the stage with unusual presence. Amanda Ogbekina was discussing innovative approaches to educational technology. Her presentation focused on bringing digital learning tools to underserved communities across Nigeria. She was brilliant, clearly passionate about her work, and possessed of the kind of natural charisma that made it impossible to look away. But what caught Andrew's attention wasn't just her professional competence. It was the fire in her eyes when she talked about helping children who had been forgotten by traditional educational systems. Technology isn't just about making our lives easier, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded conference hall. It's about creating opportunities where none existed before. Every child deserves access to quality education, regardless of where they're born or how much money their parents have. The conviction in her voice reminded Andrew of something Mr. Williams had said about his late wife Maria, that she had believed every person had value, that no one should be written off or forgotten. Watching Amanda speak, seeing the passion that radiated from her as she described programs that brought tablets and internet connectivity to rural schools, Andrew felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with recognition. After her presentation, he approached her at the networking reception, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his early days as an entrepreneur. Ms. Ogbekini, he said, extending his hand. Andrew Emeka, I wanted to tell you how impressed I was by your presentation. She turned to face him, and Andrew was struck by the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she assessed him quickly and thoroughly before responding. Mr. Emeka, she said, accepting his handshake with a firm grip. I know your company's work. You've done impressive things in the mobile application space. They fell into conversation easily, discussing the challenges of scaling technology solutions across Nigeria's diverse population, the importance of making sure that progress benefited everyone rather than just the wealthy elite. Andrew found himself sharing ideas he had never articulated before, thoughts about responsibility and purpose that had been crystallizing during his evenings with Mr. Williams. You sound like someone who's recently remembered why he got into this business in the first place, Amanda observed, her head tilted slightly as she studied his face. The comment was more perceptive than Andrew had expected, and he found himself smiling. Something like that. Someone very important to me recently reminded me that success is meaningless if it doesn't help other people succeed too. Wise person, Amanda said. I'd like to meet them sometime. The simple statement sent a thrill through Andrew's chest. She was already thinking about meeting the important people in his life, already considering connections that went deeper than professional networking. I'd like that very much, he replied, and meant it completely. Their first official date was dinner at a quiet restaurant in Ikoyi, where they talked for hours about everything from technology and business to family and dreams for the future. Amanda told him about growing up in Abuja, about parents who had sacrificed to send her to university in London, about her decision to return to Nigeria instead of pursuing opportunities in Europe or America. I could have stayed, she said, toying with her wine glass as she spoke. The offers were tempting, but this is home. These are my people. How can I help build a better future for Nigeria if I'm not here to do the work? Her sense of purpose, her willingness to choose meaning over money, reminded Andrew powerfully of Mr. Williams's quiet heroism. Both of them had made sacrifices for others, had chosen to do the right thing even when it cost them personally. I'd like you to meet my father, Andrew said suddenly, the words surprising him with their spontaneity. Amanda raised an eyebrow. I'd love to, though I have to admit I'm curious about a man who could raise such an interesting son. Andrew found himself smiling at the comment, thinking about how Mr. Williams would react to being called Andrew's father by someone else. The old man had begun to truly believe it himself, settling into the role with a natural grace that made it easy to forget their relationship hadn't always existed. He's unique, Andrew said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much too quickly. He's been through some difficult times, but He's the strongest person I know, and he has very definite opinions about the kind of woman I should marry. Marry? Amanda's eyes danced with amusement. That's quite a leap from a first date. Andrew felt heat rise in his cheeks. I wasn't suggesting. Relax, Amanda laughed, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. I think it's sweet that your father wants to see you settled down. My mother is the same way. She calls me every week to ask if I've met anyone suitable yet. The touch of her hand sent electricity up Andrew's arm, and he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, he had finally found someone who could be more than suitable. Someone who could be perfect. When Andrew brought Amanda to the mansion the following weekend, Mr. Williams was waiting in the front garden, ostensibly tending to the roses, but clearly positioned to get a good look at the woman who had captured Andrew's attention. He was dressed in his best clothes, the navy slacks and crisp white shirt that Andrew had bought for him, his hair neatly combed, his posture straight and dignified. Baba, Andrew called as they approached, using the Yoruba word for father that had become natural between them. I'd like you to meet Amanda. Mr. Williams straightened, setting down his gardening shears and wiping his hands on a clean towel before extending one to Amanda. But instead of simply shaking his hand, she surprised both men by taking it in both of hers, looking directly into his eyes as she spoke. Mr. Williams, she said warmly, Andrew has told me so much about you. Thank you for raising such a wonderful man. The simple statement, delivered with genuine warmth and respect, hit Mr. Williams like a physical blow. His eyes immediately filled with tears, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Andrew watched the interaction with growing amazement, seeing how naturally Amanda had understood the dynamic between them, how instinctively she had chosen exactly the right words. The pleasure is mine, my daughter, Mr. Williams finally managed to say. Andrew is blessed to have found someone so beautiful and gracious. They spent the afternoon together on the terrace, Amanda asking Mr. Williams about his life and listening with genuine interest to his stories about Maria and his daughters. She seemed to understand intuitively that these memories were precious to him, that sharing them was both painful and healing. Grace wanted to be a doctor, Mr. Williams told her, his voice soft with remembered love. She was always trying to fix anything that was broken. Birds with injured wings, neighbors who were feeling sick, even her dolls when they lost their stuffing. She sounds like she had a healer's heart, Amanda replied. I bet she would have been amazing. The comment made Mr. Williams smile through his tears. Yes, he said simply, she would have been. That evening, after Amanda had gone home, Mr. Williams pulled Andrew aside with an expression of barely contained excitement. This is the one, he said, gripping Andrew's hands tightly. Don't let her go. That woman has the kind of heart that makes a family strong, the kind of spirit that makes a house a home. Maria would have loved her like a daughter. Andrew felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that he had never experienced before. I wasn't planning to let her go, he said quietly. Good, Mr. Williams replied, his eyes bright with joy. Because I can already see the grandchildren you're going to give me, and I want to live long enough to spoil them properly. The observation made Andrew laugh, but it also sent a thrill through him that had nothing to do with humor. For the first time in his life, he could picture a future that included not just professional success, but personal happiness. A wife who shared his values, children who would grow up knowing the love of the extraordinary man who had become his father, a family built on the foundation of kindness and second chances that Mr. Williams had taught him to value. What he didn't know was that Mr. Williams, lying in his bed that night, was praying with more fervor than he had in years, asking God for just one more gift, the chance to live long enough to see Andrew's children, to hold in his arms the next generation of the family that had given his life meaning again. Chapter 8. Wedding Bells and New Beginnings. The courtship between Andrew and Amanda unfolded with the natural inevitability of two people who had found their perfect match. Their relationship deepened through long conversations over dinner, weekend trips to explore Nigeria's cultural sites, and quiet evenings at the mansion where Amanda became as comfortable with Mr. Williams as she was with Andrew himself. The old man had appointed himself as their unofficial chaperone and matchmaker, offering gentle advice to Andrew about romance and treating Amanda with the careful affection of a father who had found a daughter. He would often join them for dinner, regaling Amanda with stories from Andrew's business career that made her laugh and made Andrew blush with embarrassment. "You should have seen him during his first big presentation to investors," Mr. Williams told Amanda one evening, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "He practiced in front of the mirror for weeks, gesturing so dramatically that I thought he might knock over the lamps." "Baba," Andrew protested, but he was smiling. The easy familiarity between the three of them felt like the family he had never realized he was missing. Amanda fit into their household rhythm as if she had always been part of it. She brought flowers from her own garden to brighten the dining room, helped Mr. Williams with his physical therapy exercises when his old joints were stiff, and listened with genuine interest when he shared memories of his late wife and daughters. In return, he treated her with a tenderness that spoke to the father's heart that had never stopped loving, even after losing everything. 6 months after their first meeting, Andrew knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend his life with this remarkable woman. But when it came time to propose, he realized there was an important conversation he needed to have first. "Baba," he said one evening after Amanda had gone home, "I want to ask Amanda to marry me." Mr. Williams's face lit up with joy so pure it took Andrew's breath away. "Oh, my son," he said, pulling Andrew into an embrace that smelled of the cologne Andrew had bought him and the garden roses he tended so carefully. "This is the news I have been praying for. I want to do this right," Andrew continued. "I want your blessing, but more than that, I want you to be part of it. You're my father now, and I can't imagine getting married without you playing a central role." Tears streamed down Mr. Williams's face as he gripped Andrew's shoulders. "It would be my honor," he said. "My greatest honor." The proposal itself took place in the mansion's garden, under the mango tree where Mr. Williams often sat to read in the afternoons. Andrew had arranged for her favorite flowers, white roses and baby's breath, to be scattered around the base of the tree, and he had asked Mr. Williams to be nearby, ostensibly working in his garden, but actually serving as witness to the moment that would transform their little family. "Amanda," Andrew said, dropping to one knee as the sun set over Lagos in the distance, "you've brought joy into my life that I didn't even know was missing. You've made me a better man, and you've made our home brighter just by being in it. Will you marry me?" The ring, a family heirloom that had belonged to Andrew's grandmother, caught the fading light as Amanda gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in surprise and delight. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." From his position near the roses, Mr. Williams let out a whoop of joy that could probably be heard 3 streets away, abandoning all pretense of subtle observation to rush over and embrace them both. "My children," he said, tears streaming down his face as he held them close. "My beautiful children. God has been so good to this old man." The wedding planning that followed was a whirlwind of activity that transformed the mansion into a center of joyful chaos. Amanda insisted that it be held at the house, in the gardens that had become so meaningful to all of them, and Mr. Williams threw himself into the preparations with an energy that seemed to knock years off his age. He worked with a florist to design arrangements that would honor both Amanda's taste and the memory of his late wife Maria, who he said would have loved the vibrant colors and elegant simplicity of the chosen flowers. He consulted with the caterers about menu items that would represent both families' traditions, ensuring that every guest would feel welcomed and celebrated. Most importantly, he insisted on walking Amanda down the aisle. "But what about your father?" Andrew asked Amanda when she shared Mr. Williams' request. "Won't he want that honor?" Amanda smiled, taking Andrew's hand in hers. "My father will understand. Baba has become family to both of us, and this is his way of officially welcoming me into the family you two have built together." "Besides," she added with a mischievous grin, "he's been practicing his walk every morning. I think he's more excited about this than either of us." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect Lagos weather that seemed like a gift from heaven. The mansion's gardens had been transformed into an elegant outdoor cathedral, with white chairs arranged in careful rows, facing an arch covered in climbing roses and jasmine. Soft music drifted from a string quartet positioned near the fountain, and the air was filled with the scent of flowers and the excited chatter of guests. Andrew stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his hands clasped behind his back as he waited for his bride to appear. Beside him stood his best man, his business partner and oldest friend, But Andrew's eyes kept drifting to the front row, where Mr. Williams would sit after fulfilling his role as Amanda's escort. When the music changed to the wedding march, every head turned toward the back of the garden where Amanda appeared like a vision in white silk and lace. Her dress was elegant in its simplicity, her veil catching the breeze as she moved. But what took Andrew's breath away was the radiant joy on her face as she looked toward their future together. Mr. Williams, resplendent in the formal morning coat Andrew had insisted on buying for him, offered Amanda his arm with courtly grace. Together, they began the slow walk down the aisle, and Andrew felt his throat close with emotion as he watched the two people he loved most in the world approaching him with identical expressions of happiness. When they reached the altar, Mr. Williams took Amanda's hand and placed it carefully in Andrew's, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Take care of her, my son. She is precious beyond measure." "I will, Baba," Andrew replied, his own voice barely steady. "I promise." The ceremony that followed was beautiful in its blend of tradition and personal meaning. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, speaking of partnership and support, of building a life together that would honor both their love for each other and their commitment to making the world better. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. But it was at the reception, as Andrew and Amanda shared their first dance as a married couple, that the moment became truly perfect. The band was playing a slow, romantic song, and Andrew was lost in the wonder of holding his wife in his arms when he noticed Mr. Williams standing at the edge of the dance floor with tears streaming down his face. Without breaking rhythm, Andrew danced Amanda over to where the old man stood and gestured for him to join them. Mr. Williams shook his head, pointing to himself in confusion, but Andrew insisted, taking his father's hand and drawing him into their embrace. "Thank you," Andrew whispered as the three of them swayed together to the music. "For everything? For saving my life? For teaching me what family means, for showing me how to love." Mr. Williams couldn't speak through his tears, but he didn't need to. The love that radiated from him, the joy and pride and overwhelming gratitude, said everything that words could never express. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Andrew and Amanda sat with Mr. Williams on the terrace, still in their wedding clothes, sharing a quiet moment under the stars. "I used to think my story was over," Mr. Williams said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "When I lost Maria and the girls, when I ended up on the streets, I thought God was finished with me. But look at this miracle, look at this family we've built together." He reached out to take their hands, linking the three of them together in a chain of love and gratitude that felt unbreakable. "I have one more prayer now," he continued. "I pray that God gives me time to see your children, to hold them in these old arms and tell them stories about their brave father and their beautiful mother." Amanda squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears and something else, something that looked very much like hope. "I think that prayer might be answered sooner than you expect, Baba," she said quietly, and the implication in her voice made both men's eyes widen with sudden understanding and joy. The future, which had seemed so uncertain when Andrew first found Mr. Williams in the rain, now stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and filled with love. Chapter 9. The Gift of New Life. 9 months later, on a crisp Lagos morning that seemed painted with golden light, Amanda went into labor. The mansion, which had been a place of quiet contentment, suddenly erupted into controlled chaos as Andrew called the doctor, the hospital, and what seemed like half of Lagos in his nervous excitement. Mr. Williams, despite his age and the walking stick he still used on difficult days, moved with surprising energy as he helped coordinate the rush to get Amanda to the hospital. But his hands shook as he held the car door open for her, and Andrew could see the mixture of excitement and fear in his eyes. "What if something goes wrong?" the old man whispered to Andrew as they followed the ambulance to Lagos Medical Center. "What if I lose them like I lost my own family?" "That's not going to happen," Andrew said firmly, though his own heart was racing with similar fears. "Amanda is strong, the baby is healthy, and we have the best medical care in the country. Everything is going to be perfect." Ayux. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Andrew found himself praying with an intensity he hadn't experienced since the day he pulled Mr. Williams from the rain. "Please," he thought, "let everything be all right. Let this family that we've built together continue to grow and thrive." The labor lasted 14 hours, during which Andrew paced the hospital waiting room like a caged animal while Mr. Williams sat in a chair, his lips moving in constant prayer. Hospital staff brought them coffee and sandwiches, but neither man could eat. All their attention was focused on the delivery room where Amanda was bringing their child into the world. Finally, just as the sun was setting over Lagos, Dr. Okafor, the same physician who had treated Mr. Williams 2 years earlier, emerged from the delivery room with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Congratulations," she said, her voice filled with joy. "You have healthy twins, a boy and a girl." The words hit Andrew like a physical blow. Twins. Two babies when they had been expecting one. Double the blessing, double the love, double the terror and responsibility and overwhelming joy. "Twins?" Mr. Williams whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "God has truly answered my prayers beyond what I dared to hope." They were allowed into the recovery room one at a time, Andrew going first to see his wife and meet his children. Amanda looked exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with perspiration, her face glowing with the kind of happiness that could only come from bringing new life into the world. "Meet your son and daughter," she said softly, gesturing to the two tiny bundles sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed. Andrew approached slowly, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might wake the babies. They were so small, so perfect, so utterly dependent on him and Amanda to keep them safe and loved and happy. The weight of responsibility was staggering, but so was the surge of love that filled his chest as he looked at their tiny faces. "They're beautiful," he whispered, afraid to speak louder and disturb their sleep. "Just like their mother." "What should we call them?" Amanda asked, her voice soft with exhaustion and contentment. Andrew thought about the man waiting outside, the grandfather who had prayed so fervently for this moment. "Jerry," he said, touching the baby boy's tiny fist, "after my father's middle name. And Jessica, because it means God's grace, and that's what all of this has been. Grace we didn't deserve but received anyway." When Mr. Williams was finally allowed into the room, his reaction was everything Andrew had hoped for and more. The old man's knees buckled when he saw the twins, and Andrew had to catch him to keep him from falling. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he approached the bassinet with the reverence of someone approaching a miracle. "May I?" he asked, his hands trembling as he reached toward the babies. "Of course, Grandpa," Amanda said with a smile. "They're yours to love too." Mr. Williams lifted first Jerry, then Jessica, cradling them against his chest with the practiced ease of someone who had held babies before. His face transformed as he looked down at their sleeping forms, years seeming to fall away as wonder and joy replaced the lines of suffering that had marked his features for so long. "Jerry and Jessica," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "You don't know it yet, but your grandpa loves you more than life itself. I have waited so long to hold children again, to be part of a family again." From that moment forward, Mr. Williams and the twins were inseparable. Every morning, Jerry and Jessica would wake up and immediately begin crying for their Baba, as they learned to call him. He would carry them around the mansion, telling them stories about brave warriors and clever rabbits, about kindness and courage and the importance of helping others. The household staff, who had grown to love Mr. Williams over the past 2 years, were charmed by the sight of the elderly man caring for the babies with such tender devotion. He insisted on helping with night feedings, on changing diapers, on the thousand small tasks that come with caring for newborns. Amanda, initially worried that he might be taking on too much at his age, soon realized that caring for Jerry and Jessica was giving him a new lease on life. "Look at him," she said to Andrew one evening as they watched Mr. Williams sitting in the garden with both babies on his lap, singing them a Yoruba lullaby in his gentle, crackling voice. "He's gotten 10 years younger since they were born." Andrew nodded, his heart full as he watched the scene. The old man who had once been forgotten by the world, who had begged for scraps in the rain, was now the beloved center of a family's universe. Jerry and Jessica adored him with the uncomplicated love that only children can give, and their laughter seemed to erase the last shadows of sadness from his eyes. But even as Andrew rejoiced in their happiness, he couldn't shake a growing concern about Mr. Williams's health. The old man was pushing himself hard to be the grandfather he had always dreamed of being, but Andrew could see the toll it was taking. Some mornings, Mr. Williams moved more slowly than usual. His breathing was sometimes labored after playing with the twins, and there were moments when he would pause, his hand pressed to his chest, before continuing with whatever task he was performing. "Baba," Andrew said, one evening after they had put Jerry and Jessica to bed, "maybe you should see Dr. Okafor for a checkup, just to make sure everything is all right." Mr. Williams waved away the suggestion with a smile. "I'm fine, my son. Taking care of those beautiful children is the best medicine an old man could ask for. Don't worry about me. Worry about being the best father you can be." Late. But Andrew did worry. Late at night, he would lie awake listening for sounds from Mr. Williams' room, afraid that one morning he would wake up to find that the man who had become the cornerstone of their family had slipped away in his sleep. The thought was unbearable, not just for himself, but for Jerry and Jessica, who had never known a world without their beloved Baba. Chapter 10. Racing Against Time. The twins grew quickly, their personalities emerging with delightful clarity as they reached their first birthday. Jerry was adventurous and determined, always trying to climb out of his crib or reach toys that were just beyond his grasp. Jessica was thoughtful and observant, studying everything around her with serious dark eyes before breaking into smiles that could melt the hardest heart. Mr. Williams doted on them both, but Andrew noticed that he had begun taking afternoon naps more frequently, that he sometimes sat down heavily in his chair as if the simple act of standing had become difficult. When Amanda mentioned that she had seen him taking small white pills that she didn't recognize, Andrew decided it was time to intervene. "We're going to the doctor," he announced one morning, using the tone of voice that had built his business empire and brooked no argument. "All of us. It's time for the twins' checkup anyway, and while we're there, you're getting examined too." Mr. Williams started to protest, but Andrew cut him off. "Baba, those children need their grandfather. Amanda and I need our father. We can't take any chances with your health." The examination at Lagos Medical Center revealed what Andrew had feared, but Mr. Williams had been hiding. Dr. Okafor's expression was grave as she reviewed the test results, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by professional concern. "Your heart is working much harder than it should be," she told Mr. Williams gently. "The medications you've been taking are helping, but at your age, with the stress your body has endured over the years, we need to be very careful." "How careful?" Andrew asked, his voice tight with worry. "Regular monitoring, medication compliance, no strenuous activity," Dr. Okafor replied. "And Mr. Williams, you need to tell us when you're having symptoms. Chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness, these aren't things to ignore at your age." The drive home was quiet, Mr. Williams staring out the window while Jerry and Jessica babbled happily in their car seats, oblivious to the adult concerns swirling around them. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice soft but determined. "I want to see them grow up," he said simply. "I want to watch them take their first steps, hear their first words, teach them to read. I want to be here for their birthdays and their scraped knees and all the little moments that make a childhood precious." "You will be," Amanda said firmly from the front seat. "We'll make sure of it." "But if I'm not," Mr. Williams continued, "I want you to promise me something. I want you to tell them about their grandparents they never met, about Maria and Grace and Faith. I want them to know that love doesn't end with death, that family continues even when we can't see all the members." The request broke Andrew's heart, but he nodded. "I promise, Baba, but you're going to be here to tell them those stories yourself." As if determined to prove Andrew right, Mr. Williams seemed to rally in the months that followed. He was more careful about his medication, more willing to rest when he needed to, more conscious of his limitations. But he never stopped being the devoted grandfather that Jerry and Jessica adored. When the twins took their first steps, Jerry boldly launching himself across the living room toward a laughing Mr. Williams, Jessica following more cautiously but with equal determination, the old man cried with joy. When they spoke their first words, both of them saying Baba before Mama or Dada, much to Amanda and Andrew's mock indignation, he recorded it on Andrew's phone and played it back dozens of times. "They love you more than us," Andrew joked one evening, watching as Jerry and Jessica competed for space on Mr. Williams's lap during story time. "Impossible," Mr. Williams replied with a smile. "But they know that I've waited longer to love them. They know that every moment with them is a gift I thought I would never receive." The second year of the twins' lives was filled with milestones and memories that seemed to energize Mr. Williams despite his health concerns. He taught Jerry to kick a soccer ball in the garden, patiently retrieving it every time the toddler sent it flying in the wrong direction. He helped Jessica with puzzles, his weathered hands guiding her small fingers to fit pieces together while praising every success. But Andrew could see the signs that time was becoming more precious. Mr. Williams moved more slowly, tired more easily, and there were days when the medication couldn't completely mask the pain in his chest. Still, he never complained, never asked for sympathy, never suggested that caring for active toddlers might be too much for him. One afternoon, as Andrew watched from the kitchen window while Mr. Williams pushed Jerry and Jessica on the swings in the garden, Amanda came up beside him and slipped her hand into his. "He's not going to be with us forever," she said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing in both their hearts. "I know," Andrew replied, his throat tight with emotion. "But look at him out there. Look how happy he is. Whatever time we have left, we're going to make it count." Neither of them knew that Mr. Williams had been having the same thoughts, that he had begun making plans for a future he might not see, or that he was about to receive a letter that would change everything once again. Chapter 11. A Letter from the Past. It was on a Tuesday morning in April, as Mr. Williams sat on his balcony watching Jerry and Jessica play in the garden below, that Mrs. Adebayo approached with an expression of confusion on her kind face. "Baba," she said, using the title that everyone in the household now used for him. "There's a letter for you. Hand-delivered, the man said it was urgent." Mr. Williams accepted the envelope with trembling fingers, his name written across it in handwriting he didn't recognize. It had been years since he had received personal mail, decades, really. The only correspondence that came to the mansion was business-related and addressed to Andrew. He opened the envelope carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper with the letterhead of a law firm in Victoria Island. As he read, his face went pale, his hands shaking so badly that the paper rustled like leaves in a storm. "Baba?" Mrs. Adebayo asked, alarmed by his reaction. "Is everything all right?" Mr. Williams couldn't answer. The words on the page seemed impossible, too extraordinary to be real. According to the letter, he was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy that his late wife, Maria, had taken out shortly before the fire. The policy, which had been lost in the chaos following the tragedy and the subsequent legal complications, had finally been processed by the insurance company. After 25 years of bureaucratic delays and investigations, they were prepared to make payment. The amount was staggering, enough money to ensure that Mr. Williams would never want for anything for the rest of his life, enough to establish trust funds for Jerry and Jessica, enough to make a real difference in the world. But what shook him most wasn't the money itself. It was what it represented. Maria, even in death, was still taking care of him. Even after all these years, her love was still protecting him, still providing for his future. When Andrew came home that evening, he found Mr. Williams sitting in the library with the letter in his lap, tears streaming down his face. Jerry and Jessica were napping, and the house was unusually quiet. "Baba, what's wrong?" Andrew asked, rushing to the old man's side with alarm. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call Dr. Okafor?" Wordlessly, Mr. Williams handed him the letter. Andrew read it twice, his eyes widening with each pass through the legal language and financial figures. "This is incredible," he breathed. "Baba, this changes everything. You don't have to worry about being a burden, about medical expenses, about anything." Mr. Williams looked up at him with eyes full of wonder and something that might have been peace. "I was never worried about being a burden to you, my son. You've already given me more than any man deserves. But this feels like Maria's way of telling me that it's all right to hope again." "What do you want to do with it?" Andrew asked, still struggling to process the magnitude of the windfall. Mr. Williams was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where he had found such happiness with Jerry and Jessica. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm with purpose. "I want to set up funds for the children's education, of course. And I want to create a foundation, something that helps children who have been forgotten by the system, children like you were when you nearly drowned, children like I was when my family died." He paused, his eyes growing distant as he considered possibilities. "I want to call it the Maria Williams Foundation for Forgotten Children. It will provide scholarships, emergency assistance, mentorship programs, everything that might help a child who seems lost find their way again. Andrew felt his throat close with emotion. Even now, even with this unexpected blessing, Mr. Williams' first thought was of helping others. It was exactly what Andrew should have expected from the man who had spent his life saving children, even when it cost him everything. "That's perfect, Baba," he said quietly. "Maria would be proud." "There's something else," Mr. Williams continued, his voice growing softer. "I want to try to find the other boy, the one I mentioned in my letter to you, the one whose family blamed me for the accident. I want to make sure he's all right, and if he's not, I want to help him too." The request stirred something in Andrew's memory, a half-forgotten detail from the letter Mr. Williams had left him after the hospital stay. There had been another child, another rescue, another family that had reacted with suspicion and blame instead of gratitude. "David Okoro," Andrew said, remembering the name he had researched but never followed up on. "I tried to find him once, but I got distracted by work, by life. We never finished that search." "Maybe it's time we did," Mr. Williams said. "Maybe Maria's gift is meant to heal more than just our family." That night, as Andrew lay in bed beside Amanda, he told her about the letter and Mr. Williams's plans. She listened in amazement, her head resting on his shoulder as they talked about the strange ways that love and grace seemed to work in their lives. "It's like Maria is still watching over him," she said softly, "still making sure he's taken care of." "And still giving him ways to take care of others," Andrew added. "That foundation is going to help so many children." "What about this David person?" Amanda asked. "Do you think we'll be able to find him?" Andrew was quiet for a moment, thinking about the conversation he'd had with the retired sports instructor, about the bitter man who had blamed Mr. Williams for his family's misfortunes. "I don't know. It's been over 20 years. He could be anywhere, could be anyone, but if Baba wants to try, we'll try." They had no way of knowing that David Okoro was closer than they imagined, or that the search for him would uncover a story of pain and misunderstanding that had festered for decades, waiting for the healing touch that only forgiveness could provide. Chapter 12. The Search and the Truth. The private investigator that Andrew hired was thorough and discreet, qualities that served him well in tracking down David Okoro's current whereabouts. It took 3 weeks of careful investigation, following paper trails and interviewing former classmates. But eventually the pieces came together. David Okoro lived in a modest apartment in Surulere, working as a night security guard at a small office complex. He was unmarried, estranged from what remained of his family, and, by all accounts, still carrying the bitter resentment that had poisoned his life since childhood. "He's not doing well, sir," the investigator reported to Andrew over the phone. "Financially, emotionally, socially, it seems like he's been stuck in the same place for years. His co-workers describe him as angry, isolated. He's the kind of man who blames the world for his problems." Andrew felt a familiar weight settle in his chest, the same sense of responsibility and urgency that had driven him to rescue Mr. Williams from the rain 2 years earlier. Here was another life that had been damaged by the same tragedy that had ultimately brought Andrew his greatest blessings. "I want to meet with him," Andrew told the investigator. "Arrange a time and place where we can talk privately." When Andrew shared the news with Mr. Williams, the old man's reaction was immediate and emotional. Despite his failing health, despite the distance of 25 years, his first concern was for the boy he had also saved. "How is he?" Mr. Williams asked, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Is he well? Is he happy?" Andrew chose his words carefully, not wanting to add to Mr. Williams' burden of guilt. "He's struggling, Baba. The investigator says he's had a difficult life. I think the blame his family placed on you became a poison that's been eating at him for years." Mr. Williams closed his eyes, pain etching deeper lines in his weathered face. "I failed him," he whispered. "I saved his body that day, but I failed to save his spirit from the damage that followed." "You didn't fail anyone," Andrew said firmly. "You did what was right, what was brave, what was necessary. What happened afterward wasn't your fault. It was the fault of people who were too small-minded and frightened to see the truth." But Mr. Williams shook his head, lost in his own regrets. "2 boys I pulled from that water. One became successful and happy and built a beautiful family. The other has spent his life in bitterness and isolation. How can I not feel responsible for that difference?" Because, Andrew said, kneeling beside his father's chair and taking his hands, you gave us both the same gift, the gift of life. What we chose to do with that gift was up to us, not you. The meeting with David Okora was arranged for a Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe in Victoria Island. Andrew arrived early, choosing a corner table where they could speak privately without being overheard. He was nervous in a way he hadn't been since his early days as an entrepreneur, unsure how David would react to seeing him or learning about Mr. Williams's current circumstances. David arrived exactly on time, his appearance immediately marking him as a man who had been worn down by life. He was thin to the point of gauntness, his clothes clean but cheap, his eyes holding the kind of wariness that came from expecting disappointment from every interaction. "You're Andrew Emeka," he said, settling into the chair across from Andrew with obvious discomfort. "I looked you up after you called. You're that tech billionaire." "I am," Andrew confirmed, "but that's not why I wanted to meet with you. I wanted to talk to you about Mr. Williams." The reaction was immediate and explosive. David's face darkened, his hands clenching into fists on the table. "Don't say that name to me," he snarled. "That man ruined my life." "That man saved your life," Andrew replied calmly. "Just like he saved mine." "Saved?" David laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call it? My family lost everything because of him. Our reputation, our business, our standing in the community. All gone because people thought we were cursed, thought he was some kind of predator who lured children into danger." Andrew studied David's face, seeing the pain beneath the anger, the hurt that had been festering for decades without healing. "What if I told you that he lost everything too? That after you and I nearly drowned, after he saved both our lives, he was blamed and dismissed and left with nothing?" "Good," David said viciously. "He deserved it. What if I told you that his wife and 2 young daughters died in a fire shortly after that? That he spent years homeless, begging in the streets, forgotten by everyone except the boy whose life he had saved?" The words seemed to hit David like physical blows. His face went pale, his certainty wavering for the first time since he'd sat down. "You're lying." "I'm not." Andrew pulled out his phone, showing David photos of Mr. Williams from the night he'd found him in the rain, then more recent pictures of him with Jerry and Jessica. "This is the man who saved us both. This is what your family's blame and the community's fear did to a hero." David stared at the photos for a long time, his breathing becoming labored as the reality of what he was seeing sank in. The angry certainty that had sustained him for 25 years was cracking, revealing the frightened, hurt child he had been when his world fell apart. "He had a family?" David whispered. "A wife named Maria who taught Sunday school. 2 daughters, Grace and Faith, 8 and 10 years old. They all died in a house fire while people in the community were calling him cursed, saying he was dangerous to children." Tears began to slide down David's cheeks, though he seemed unaware of them. "My parents told me he was evil, that he had lured us to the pool to hurt us. They said the only reason he saved us was to cover up his real intentions." "Your parents were wrong," Andrew said gently. "They were scared and looking for someone to blame for something that was just a childhood accident. But their fear destroyed an innocent man's life, and it poisoned yours too." David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. For 25 years, he had carried hatred and resentment, had built his identity around being a victim of Mr. Williams's supposed malice. Now, suddenly, that foundation was crumbling, leaving him with nothing but the truth he had been too young and too manipulated to see. "What have I done?" he whispered through his tears. "What have I become?" Andrew reached across the table, placing a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "You've become someone who was hurt and never given the chance to heal properly. But it's not too late to change that." Is Mr. Williams still alive?" "Yes," Andrew said. "He's my father now, in every way that matters. He lives with my wife and me, helps us raise our twin children. He's finally found the happiness and family that was stolen from him all those years ago." David looked up, his eyes red with tears, but showing something that might have been hope. Would it be possible for me to see him? To apologize for what my family did, for the hatred I've carried all these years?" Andrew smiled, feeling a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. "I think he would like that very much. In fact, I think he's been praying for exactly this opportunity for the past 25 years. As they left the cafe together, Andrew couldn't help but think about the strange ways that grace worked in the world. A drowning accident had connected three lives in ways that none of them could have imagined. Pain and misunderstanding had separated them for decades, but love and truth were finally bringing them back together. Mr. Williams was about to receive the greatest gift of all, the chance to heal a wound he had carried for 25 years, and the opportunity to save David Okoro's soul the same way he had once saved his body. Chapter 13. Forgiveness and Redemption. The reunion between Mr. Williams and David Okoro took place in the mansion's garden, under the same mango tree where Andrew and Amanda had been married, where countless family memories had been made, where healing seemed to flow as naturally as the breeze through the leaves. Mr. Williams was waiting on the terrace when Andrew's car pulled up, his hands gripping his walking stick, not from physical need but from nervous anticipation. He had spent the 3 days since Andrew's meeting with David in a state of anxious hope, praying for the strength to say the right words, to offer the forgiveness that could heal decades of pain. When David emerged from the car, both men stopped and stared at each other across the garden. The years fell away, and for a moment they were simply the man who had saved a drowning child, and the child whose family had blamed him for their misfortunes. David approached slowly, his steps hesitant, his eyes filled with the shame and regret that had been building since his conversation with Andrew. When he was close enough to see the lines of age and suffering in Mr. Williams's face, his composure finally broke completely. "Mr. Williams," he said, dropping to his knees in the soft grass, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything my family said, for everything I believed, for all the hatred I carried. You saved my life, and I helped destroy yours." Mr. Williams' own eyes filled with tears as he looked down at the broken man kneeling before him. Without hesitation, he dropped his walking stick and knelt as well, taking David's hands in his own weathered ones. "My son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you were a child. You believed what the adults told you to believe. You have nothing to apologize for." "But I do," David insisted, tears streaming down his face. "Even as an adult, I could have searched for the truth. I could have tried to understand what really happened. Instead, I let the bitterness consume me. I let it turn me into someone small and angry and alone." Mr. Williams pulled David into an embrace, holding him the way he had once held Andrew in the rain, the way he held Jerry and Jessica when they were frightened or sad. "The past is the past," he whispered. "What matters now is that you're here, that you're ready to heal, that we can finally set things right." Andrew watched from the terrace, his heart full as he witnessed the power of forgiveness in action. Amanda stood beside him, their arms around each other, both of them understanding that they were seeing something sacred, something that would change all their lives. "Should we go inside?" Amanda whispered. "Give them privacy?" "Not yet," Andrew replied softly. "They need witnesses to this moment. They need family around them." As if hearing his words, Mr. Williams looked up and gestured for Andrew and Amanda to join them. "Come," he called. "David, I want you to meet my family." The introductions were tearful and beautiful. David met Amanda with shy gratitude, clearly overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance he received from people who had every reason to resent him. And when Jerry and Jessica came running from the house, drawn by the voices of adults, they went straight to Mr. Williams as they always did, climbing into his lap without a care for the stranger who was watching them with wonder. "These are my grandchildren," Mr. Williams said proudly, his arms full of squirming toddlers. "Jerry and Jessica. They are the light of my life." David stared at the children with something approaching awe. "You have grandchildren," he said softly. "After everything you lost, after all the pain, you found a family again." "God blessed me beyond what I deserved," Mr. Williams replied. "But there's room for more family if you want it." The offer hung in the air like a prayer, and David's face crumpled with fresh tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, much less your love." "None of us deserve grace," Mr. Williams said gently. "That's what makes it grace. But it's freely given if you're willing to accept it." That evening, as the sun set over Lagos and the garden, filled with the soft glow of twilight, the expanded family sat together around the outdoor dining table. David had been invited to stay for dinner, And though he was clearly nervous about accepting such kindness, he couldn't bring himself to leave this place where healing was happening. Mr. Williams told the story of the swimming pool incident from his perspective, helping David understand not just what had happened that day, but why he had acted without hesitation to save two drowning children. He spoke about his love for children, about his own daughters who had been taken too soon, about the protective instinct that had driven him to risk his own safety for Andrew and David. "I never blamed your parents for their fear," he said quietly. "Losing a child, even almost losing a child, makes people desperate to find someone to blame. I understood their anger even when it destroyed my life." "But it shouldn't have," David said, his voice filled with regret. "They should have thanked you, honored you, made sure you were celebrated for your courage." "Perhaps," Mr. Williams acknowledged. "But if my life had continued on its original path, I might never have experienced this." He gestured to include Andrew, Amanda, and the twins. "I might never have known what it felt like to be truly needed, truly loved, truly part of a family that chose me rather than one I was simply born into." The observation was profound in its simplicity, and it left everyone at the table quiet for a moment as they considered the mysterious ways that pain and healing, loss and redemption could work together to create something beautiful. "What happens now?" David asked eventually. "I don't know how to be part of a family. I don't know how to trust or love or forgive myself for the years I wasted." "You learn," Amanda said gently, "one day at a time with people who care about you. It's not easy, but it's worth it." "And you start by accepting that you're welcome here," Andrew added. "Not as a guest, not as someone we're doing a favor for, but as family. As the brother I never knew I had." Mr. Williams smiled through his tears, his heart full as he watched his family embrace David with the same unconditional love they had shown him. The boy he had pulled from the water 25 years ago was finally coming home, and the circle that had been broken by fear and misunderstanding was finally complete. But even as joy filled the garden that night, Mr. Williams was acutely aware that his time with this precious family was growing short. His heart was failing more each day, and no amount of love could change the medical reality he was facing. Soon, very soon, he would have to say goodbye to the people who had given his life meaning. But first, he had one more gift to give them, a truth he had discovered in his final letter, a secret that would ensure his legacy lived on long after he was gone. Chapter 14. The Final Secret. 2 weeks after David's first visit to the mansion, Mr. Williams asked Andrew to help him with something in his room. His health had been declining more rapidly lately, the strain of emotional reunions and the excitement of expanded family taking its toll on his failing heart. But his mind remained sharp, and there was a determined gleam in his eyes that Andrew recognized from their earliest days together. "There's something under the floorboard," Mr. Williams said, pointing to the same spot where Andrew had once found his letter about David. "Something I should have told you about long ago." Andrew knelt and pried up the loose board, revealing a manila envelope that was thicker than the first letter had been. His name was written across it in Mr. Williams's careful handwriting. But this time the paper was newer, the ink fresh. "What is this, Baba?" Andrew asked, his heart beginning to race with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "My legacy," Mr. Williams replied simply. "Everything I want you to know about the choices I've made with Maria's insurance money, about the foundation we discussed, about the future I see for our family." Andrew opened the envelope carefully, pulling out several documents that made his eyes widen with surprise. There were legal papers establishing the Maria Williams Foundation for Forgotten Children, with Andrew named as chairman and David as the director of outreach programs. There were trust funds established for Jerry and Jessica that would ensure their education and provide them with the means to continue their grandfather's charitable work. There were scholarships created for children from broken homes, emergency funds for families in crisis, and partnerships with schools to identify and help students who were struggling. But what took Andrew's breath away was the final document, a detailed plan for a residential facility for children who had been abandoned or abused, a place where they could find safety, education, and the kind of love that could heal even the deepest wounds. "Papa," Andrew whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is incredible. But this much money, this scope of work, it's going to take years to implement properly." Mr. Williams smiled sadly, settling into his favorite chair with the careful movements of a man whose body was failing him. I won't be here to see most of it, my son. We both know that. But you will be, and David will be, and someday Jerry and Jessica will carry it forward too. The admission hung between them like a weight. They had both been avoiding the reality of Mr. Williams's declining health, hoping that love and medical care could somehow overcome the inevitable. But now, with this final gift before them, there was no escaping the truth. "Don't talk like that," Andrew said fiercely. "You're going to be here. You're going to see this foundation help thousands of children. You're going to watch Jerry and Jessica grow up." "Andrew," Mr. Williams said gently, "my heart is tired. I can feel it slowing down, working harder for each beat. Dr. Okafor has been honest with me about what's coming, even if she's been gentle with you and Amanda." The words hit Andrew like physical blows, confirming fears he had been trying to suppress for months. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Weeks, perhaps. Maybe a month if I'm careful and lucky." Mr. Williams reached out to take Andrew's hand, his fingers trembling but his grip still strong. "But don't you see? That's why this is so important. I need to know that the work will continue, that the children who come after us will have someone to pull them from the water when they're drowning." That evening, Andrew called the entire family together. Amanda, David, even Jerry and Jessica, who were too young to understand the gravity of the conversation, but old enough to sense the emotional weight in the room. Mr. Williams sat in his chair with the twins on his lap, his arms around them as he explained his plans for the foundation and his hopes for their future. "This isn't about saying goodbye," he said, his voice calm despite the tears in his eyes. "This is about saying hello to the next chapter of our story. Every child we help through this foundation will be a continuation of the love we've built together." David was overcome with emotion as he learned about his role in the foundation. "You want me to help run this, even after everything that happened between our families?" "Especially because of what happened," Mr. Williams replied. "You understand what it feels like to be lost, to be angry, to feel like the world has forgotten you. That makes you the perfect person to reach children who are feeling the same way." Amanda wiped tears from her eyes as she looked at the detailed plans her father-in-law had created. "You've thought of everything," she said. Educational programs, counseling services, job training for older children, support for families in crisis. This is going to change so many lives." "That's the point," Mr. Williams said softly. "I was saved from drowning in that pool 25 years ago, not just by my own actions, but by Andrew's gratitude and love. Now I want to save as many other children as possible from drowning in neglect, abuse, poverty, and despair." Jerry and Jessica, sensing the serious mood but not understanding its cause, snuggled closer to their beloved Baba. They had never known a world without him, couldn't imagine their daily routines without his stories, his songs, his gentle presence. But Mr. Williams looked down at them with a love so profound it seemed to fill the entire room. "My precious grandchildren," he whispered, "I want you to remember that your Baba loves you more than all the stars in the sky. And someday, when you're old enough to understand, I want you to help your parents carry on the work of helping children who need someone to care about them." That night, as the family prepared for bed, Mr. Williams called Andrew aside for one final private conversation. "Promise me something," he said, his eyes bright with urgency despite his physical weakness. "Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll make sure David feels like family. He spent 25 years believing he was unwanted, unloved, forgotten. Don't let him go back to that place." "I promise, Baba," Andrew said, his throat tight with emotion. "He's our brother now. He'll always have a home with us. And promise me that you'll tell Jerry and Jessica about their other grandparents, about Maria and Grace and Faith. I want them to know that love creates a chain that connects all of us, even across death." "I promise that too." Mr. Williams smiled, a expression of peace settling over his weathered features. "Then I am ready for whatever comes next. I have lived to see love triumph over hatred, forgiveness heal old wounds, and family grow in ways I never imagined possible. What more could an old man ask for?" As Andrew kissed his father goodnight and helped him to his bed, neither of them knew that this would be their last meaningful conversation, or that by morning, Mr. Williams would have slipped away peacefully in his sleep, his final prayer of gratitude still on his lips. Chapter 15. Legacy of Love. The morning sun was streaming through the mansion's windows when Jerry and Jessica made their usual run to Baba's room, their little feet pattering down the hallway as they called out for their beloved grandfather. But when they burst through his door with their typical enthusiasm, expecting to find him pretending to sleep so they could wake him up with giggles and kisses, they found something different. Mr. Williams lay in his bed, perfectly peaceful, his face serene with the kind of contentment that only comes from a life well lived and a heart at rest. His hands were folded over his chest, and there was the faintest suggestion of a smile on his lips, as if his final dreams had been filled with joy. "Baba," Jerry whispered, approaching the bed with the caution that children instinctively display when something feels different. "Wake up, Baba. Tell us stories." Jessica, always more observant than her brother, stood in the doorway with her thumb in her mouth, her dark eyes wide with confusion. Something was wrong, though she couldn't understand what. When their grandfather didn't respond to Jerry's gentle shaking, both children began to cry. Not the frustrated tears of children denied what they wanted, but the deep, instinctive sobs of souls recognizing loss even when their minds couldn't comprehend it. Their wails brought Andrew and Amanda running from their bedroom, still in their pajamas, their hearts pounding, with the kind of parental panic that comes from hearing children in distress. But when they reached Mr. Williams' room and saw the scene before them, they understood immediately what their children could not yet grasp. "Oh, Baba," Amanda whispered, tears already streaming down her face as she gathered Jerry and Jessica into her arms. "Oh, my dear, sweet father." Andrew approached the bed slowly, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch Mr. Williams's forehead. The skin was cool, peaceful, and Andrew could see in his father's face the same dignity and grace that had marked his life. There was no sign of struggle or pain, only the quiet contentment of a man who had completed his purpose and was ready to rest. "He's with Maria now," Andrew said softly, his voice breaking on the words. "He's with Grace and Faith. He's finally home." The next few hours passed in a blur of necessary phone calls and arrangements. Dr. Okafor arrived to confirm what they already knew, her professional composure giving way to genuine grief as she looked at the man she had come to respect and admire. David arrived shortly after, his face crumpling when he learned that the father figure he had just found was already gone. "I should have come sooner," he said, guilt and regret thick in his voice. "I should have had more time with him." "You had exactly the time you were meant to have," Amanda replied gently, pulling him into the family circle that had formed around Mr. Williams's bed. "He knew you forgave each other. He knew you were family. That's what mattered to him. The funeral arrangements were handled with the same care and attention to detail that Mr. Williams had brought to every aspect of his life in the mansion. Andrew insisted that it be held in the garden, under the mango tree where so many important family moments had taken place. He wanted Mr. Williams to be surrounded by the beauty and love that had defined his final years, not confined to the cold formality of a funeral home. The service itself was a celebration of a life that had touched more people than anyone had realized. Former colleagues from Mr. Williams's days as a janitor came to pay their respects, having heard about his death through the network of people who remembered his quiet kindness. Neighbors from the mansion's exclusive area attended, having grown fond of the dignified old man who always greeted them with warm smiles during his daily walks. But it was Andrew's eulogy that captured the true essence of the man they were honoring. "My father," Andrew began, his voice strong despite the tears in his eyes, "was a hero long before I understood what that word meant. When I was 10 years old, drowning in a school swimming pool, he didn't hesitate to risk his own life to save mine. But his heroism didn't end that day. It continued every day for the rest of his life." He paused, looking out at the assembled mourners, seeing the faces of people whose lives had been touched by Mr. Williams's quiet grace. He was a man who lost everything: his wife, his daughters, his home, his dignity, his place in the world. But he never lost his capacity for love, his willingness to help others, his belief that every life has value. When I found him again 2 years ago, begging in the rain, he was still the same man who had saved my life decades earlier. Still brave, still kind, still ready to sacrifice for others. Andrew's voice grew stronger as he continued, fueled by the need to ensure that everyone understood the magnitude of the man they were burying. But his greatest heroism was in the way he chose to live his final years. Instead of being bitter about the injustices he had suffered, he embraced the family that welcomed him. Instead of dwelling on what he had lost, he celebrated what he had found. He became a grandfather to my children, a father to me and my wife, a brother to David Okoro, whom he had also saved as a child. The mention of David brought fresh tears to many eyes, as the story of forgiveness and redemption had become part of the family's narrative. My father taught me that saving a life is not just about pulling someone from drowning water, Andrew continued. It's about pulling them from despair, from loneliness, from the belief that they don't matter. He saved my life when I was 10, and he spent the rest of his life saving my soul by showing me what love, forgiveness, and family really mean. As the service concluded and the family said their final goodbyes, Jerry and Jessica approached their grandfather's casket with the fearless curiosity of children. They each placed a drawing they had made, stick figures of their family under a large tree with "I love you, Baba" written in Amanda's careful handwriting. "Will Baba come back?" Jessica asked, her small hand in Andrew's as they watched the casket being lowered into the ground. "Not in the way you mean, sweetheart," Andrew replied, kneeling to be at her eye level. "But every time we help someone who needs help, every time we show kindness to someone who's forgotten, every time we love each other the way Baba loved us, he'll be there with us." In the weeks that followed Mr. Williams's death, the family threw themselves into establishing the foundation that had been his final gift to them. The Maria Williams Foundation for Forgotten Children became more than just a charitable organization. It became a living memorial to a man who had understood that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you gave away. David proved to be extraordinarily gifted at his role as director of outreach programs. His own experience of feeling forgotten and abandoned gave him an insight into the children they were trying to help that no amount of professional training could have provided. He could spot the signs of a child in crisis from across a room, could understand the defensive anger that masked deep hurt, could offer the kind of hope that only comes from someone who has walked the same dark path. Amanda used her background in educational technology to develop innovative programs that brought learning opportunities directly to children who couldn't access traditional schools. The Foundation's mobile learning centers traveled throughout Nigeria, bringing tablets, internet connectivity, and qualified teachers to remote villages and urban slums where children had never imagined such resources could exist. Andrew found himself drawn into the day-to-day operations of the Foundation in ways he hadn't expected. His business success had always been abstract, software and applications that helped other businesses succeed. But this work was immediate and personal. Every child who learned to read through their programs, every family that received emergency assistance during a crisis, every young person who received a scholarship to continue their education was a direct connection to Mr. Williams' legacy. But it was Jerry and Jessica who provided the most powerful reminder of their grandfather's continuing presence in their lives. As they grew from toddlers into young children, they began to understand more about the Foundation and their family's commitment to helping others. They insisted on participating in volunteer activities, on visiting the children's centers that bore their grandfather's name, on giving away toys and clothes to children who had less. "Baba would be proud," Jessica said one day as she helped pack books for a mobile library unit, her 5-year-old hands carefully placing each volume in its designated box. "How do you know?" Jerry asked, always the more skeptical of the twins. "Because helping people made him smile," Jessica replied with the simple wisdom of childhood. "And when we help people, I can feel him smiling." 5 years after Mr. Williams' death, the Foundation had grown into one of Nigeria's most respected charitable organizations. They had opened 3 residential facilities for abandoned and abused children, established scholarship programs in 12 states, and created emergency assistance networks that had helped thousands of families in crisis. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of their success was the reunion dinner that the family held every year on the anniversary of the day Andrew had found Mr. Williams in the rain. The table in the mansion's dining room was always set for one more place than they needed. Mr. Williams's chair remained in its usual position, a reminder that love transcends death and that family bonds are stronger than any physical separation. "Tell us the story again," Jerry would always request as they sat around the table, even though he and Jessica knew every detail by heart. And Andrew would tell it again, the story of the drowning boy and the brave janitor, of the lost years and the miraculous reunion, of forgiveness and redemption, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. He would tell them about their grandmother Maria, whom they had never met but who had provided the insurance money that made the foundation possible. He would describe their aunts Grace and Faith, who had died too young but whose memory lived on in every child the foundation helped. But most of all, he would tell them about their Baba, the man who had saved his life and then saved his soul, who had shown them all what it meant to be truly wealthy in the things that mattered most. As the years passed and Jerry and Jessica grew into young adults with their own dreams and ambitions, they never forgot the lessons their grandfather had taught them through his example. They both chose careers in service, Jerry becoming a doctor who specialized in treating underprivileged children, Jessica following in her mother's footsteps as an educator who focused on reaching students that traditional schools had failed. David, meanwhile, had found not just purpose but peace in his work with the foundation. He had married a fellow social worker he met during a training conference, and together they had adopted 3 children who had come through the foundation's programs. His own experience of feeling unwanted and unloved had given him a special understanding of what these children needed, and his patient, gentle approach to healing had become legendary among the foundation staff. And Amanda and Andrew, now in their 50s and grandparents themselves to David's children, and Jerry and Jessica's own families, continued to run the foundation with the same passion and commitment that had driven Mr. Williams' vision. They had learned that true success was not measured in stock prices or business acquisitions, but in lives changed, families healed, and hope restored to those who had given up believing in tomorrow. On quiet evenings, when the mansion was filled with the laughter of grandchildren and the comfortable conversation of a family that had learned the true meaning of love, Andrew would sometimes walk out to the garden where Mr. Williams was buried. The mango tree had grown taller and stronger over the years, its branches providing shade for the simple headstone that bore the inscription, Williams Amika, beloved father, grandfather, and hero. He saved lives and souls. Thank you, Baba, Andrew would whisper to the peaceful evening air. Thank you for saving me, for teaching me, for showing me what really matters. Your legacy lives on in every child we help, every family we heal, every life we touch with the love you taught us to share. And in the gentle breeze that stirred the leaves of the mango tree, in the distant laughter of children playing in the garden, in the warm glow of light from the mansion's windows, Andrew could feel Mr. Williams's presence. Not gone, but transformed. Not lost, but living on in every act of kindness, every gesture of love, every moment when someone chose to pull another person from the drowning waters of despair. The story that had begun with a frightened boy and a brave janitor had become something larger than either of them could have imagined. A legacy of love that would ripple through generations, touching lives not yet born, healing wounds not yet inflicted, and proving that sometimes the most profound heroism comes not from grand gestures but from the simple decision to care about another human being's welfare more than your own. And in a world that often seemed filled with darkness and division, the Maria Williams Foundation for Forgotten Children stood as a beacon of hope, a reminder that love always finds a way, that forgiveness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what we accumulate for ourselves, but from what we give away to others. The rain still fell over Lagos, as it always had and always would. But now, when it did, there were people watching for those who might be drowning, not in water, but in despair, loneliness, and the belief that no one cared whether they lived or died. And when they found those people, they would pull them from the storm, wrap them in love, and show them that every life has value, every person deserves dignity, and every story of pain can become a story of redemption. If we have the courage to believe in second chances, Mr. Williams had saved 2 boys from drowning in a swimming pool 25 years ago. But his true legacy was the thousands of children who had been saved from drowning in poverty, abuse, neglect, and despair by the foundation that bore his wife's name and carried his love forward into a future bright with hope and possibility. The hero who had been forgotten by the world for so long would now be remembered forever in every life his love had touched, in every family his foundation had helped, and in every act of kindness performed by those who understood that true wealth comes not from what we have, but from what we give away.